Longtime active member of NCIFT, and you're joining us today for the Hot Topics in Food Labeling and Advertising. This is part one of a two-part series. Just to go through some quick notes, I hope. There we go. Just so everyone knows, the event is being recorded. This was originally scheduled as a meeting, an in-person meeting in Modesto at the Almond Board for last week. And obviously we live in an alternate universe now, and we're not meeting in person. So I hope you enjoy that. CIFT, quick note, has canceled all of the Suppliers Nights events. That includes the golf outing, the dinner, the expo, and the symposium. Will be, as it notes there, and we're working to provide some other opportunities like this webinar to fill that void. And while we're all isolated at home, we'd certainly love your ideas and thoughts about other topics we can present. You see my email there. You can certainly contact me there, and we'll be pushing this through so that you know there is a Q&A session at the end of the event. You should have a chat icon on your screen somewhere. I think it's near the bottom. And use that to chat with us. We'll go through some questions and answers at the end. Let me please thank Erin Evers. Erin is the lady who, she's your membership secretary for Northern California IFT. And Erin is the person who originally organized the meeting at the Almond Board in Modesto with Natalie as our speaker. She encouraged us all to get together and create this into a webinar. Thank you for that encouragement and that drive, Erin. Elise is the CEO of Tandem Foods, and we are using Elise's Zoom account for today. She volunteered to let us use that for these webinars, and for that we are eternally grateful. Elise, thank you. And then of course there's our speaker, Natalie. We'll talk more about Natalie soon. If you didn't realize this is a two-part series, here's the two parts. Today we're going to talk about natural and preservative-free, as well as other trends in food litigation. And next Friday we'll do a similar talk, more around Prop 65 and how it's being enforced and some of the things that are happening around Prop 65. So hope you can join us next Friday as well. With that, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Natalie Reiner. She has her doctorate of jurisprudence and a master's in public health. You see here she practices food and drug law, and she doesn't just do it in North America, but several jurisdictions. You see those listed around the globe. I'm sure they will be providing that email address later on in the talk in case you need to chat with her later. So with that, I need to do some technical things like stop sharing my screen, and we can put Natalie on the screen.
Sounds good. Thank you so much to Bruce and Erin and Elise. This is a great opportunity, and I hope everyone's hanging in there during this very interesting time, which I'm sure we'll all remember very well. But let's take a break from all the coronavirus news and talk about the more mundane world of litigation against food. So I've been practicing in food law for about 12 years now. And when I started, litigation against food wasn't that popular, but it's gotten increasingly active. And so now when we evaluate food labels, we're looking at things from a class action litigation perspective as much, if not more than from the regulatory perspective, because it's not just enough anymore to comply with FDA labeling regulations. You also want to put on the hat of a motivated class action plaintiff who's looking to make a quick buck off of challenging a claim on your label. So what we're going to be talking about today are claims that have been targeted in recent years for litigation. As you all know, natural is a really hot area of litigation, but also we've seen a lot more claims on nutrient-specific labeling claims concerning protein, sugar, and trans fat. There's also a bunch of made in the USA litigation that we're going to talk about. And then separate from claims, I wanted to talk to you about slack fill litigation that's prosecuted pretty actively in California by county officials, county district attorneys, in addition to private plaintiffs. So that's just an overview of what we're going to be talking about. So first off, we're going to talk about claims. So as you're looking at a label and you're considering what claims to make about your food, you know, these general concepts we're going to keep in mind are always that there has to be a reasonable basis for each claim. There has to be appropriate substantiation that you've got in your files documenting that reasonable basis for each claim. Something that's very popular with private plaintiffs is just picking apart any violation of an FDA regulation. They take that as per se being an unreasonable claim if you're not complying with every single technical detail of an FDA regulation. So that's something to look out for. And something that can be difficult to explain sometimes when we're doing these labeling reviews for clients is that we're not looking at these claims from a reasonable consumer perspective. We're really trying to think about what are the most outlandish interpretations that a plaintiff could come up with for all these claims, just so that we can advise our clients that it's a potential risk to state a claim in a certain way. We're really trying to think about class action plaintiffs that are trying not to litigate a matter for the public good, but just to extract some money from your company. So that's who we're trying to keep in mind when we're doing these claim reviews. So something you don't need to worry about is puffery. So the example that I've got in this slide is world's best cup of coffee. So Buddy the Elf in that movie Elf, he bought into puffery, but he was a very, very, very naive customer. So you don't need to worry about a Buddy the Elf type customer for puffery. For puffery, you can think about it as just a reasonable person. And if something is just obviously exaggerated or vague and unverifiable, that is not a risky claim. And something to keep in mind too is just something that you should always avoid are drug claims. And so any claim that states or implies that a food can diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent a disease, that's going to move that food product into the drug realm. And so you might get a warning letter from FDA, and then soon after you get a warning letter, it's usually followed by class action litigation. So here I've got a bottle of a fake product called Miracle Cure. You'll see a lot of products these days that look just like this that are CBD products, cannabidiol products. So CBD oil containing foods, waters, that some of which make impermissible drug claims. And so while those products have been readily available on the market, the only ones that FDA has been going after are the ones that are making pretty egregious claims about CBD being able to treat conditions like Alzheimer's or cancer or anxiety. So I just wanted to mention, you know, that drug claims are something you just want to stay far away from. So what are the claims that we're seeing a lot of activity on in the class action sphere? So the one that I think everybody's most familiar with are natural claims. And there's a lot of variations on natural that are provided in green in the upper left slide. But apart from all natural claims, We're also seeing a lot of litigation about similar claims like no artificial ingredients or no artificial preservatives. The types of ingredients that are giving rise to challenges of these types of claims are genetically modified ingredients. There's also been dairy products that have been challenged where the dairy cows have been fed GMO feed. Products like Cheerios have been challenged for having permissible residues of substances like glyphosate. There's thousands of products that have been challenged for having highly processed or synthetic ingredients. We're going to talk about some ingredients that have been very hot for challenge in that realm, including acids like citric acid. So apart from natural claims, and we're going to talk about each one of these topics in upcoming slides, but another very hot area are sugar claims. So FDA regulates some sugar content claims in its regulations, like no sugar added and sugar free. And we're seeing lots of private plaintiffs challenging claims for allegedly failing to follow FDA's regulations, in particular by failing to provide a footnote that's specified in those regulations. So we're going to talk about that. Protein claims were more popular a year or two, but continue to be brought against foods. So protein claims, whenever you make a protein claim, it triggers the need to do analysis of the PD-CAS score, which we're going to talk about, and then to provide a daily percent value for protein in the nutrition facts box. So when foods are bearing protein claims and then failing to declare a percent daily value or providing incorrect percent daily value information in the nutrition facts, that's being challenged a lot. We're going to talk about made in the USA and made in California standards. And then we're going to talk about the last type of claim we're going to talk about are a recent spate of cases on vanilla ice cream and the potential for those cases to bleed into other foods and flavor labeling issues. So in court, if these issues get litigated, the plaintiff must prove an injury from an actual reliance on false or misleading information. So that means like the plaintiff would have to prove that they wouldn't have otherwise purchased the product, or they wouldn't have paid a premium for the product had the claim not been true. So these are the types of issues that would get played out in court, but often the public doesn't see all of the challenges that we as attorneys are helping to settle in the background. So when we're assisting clients in defending against demand letters from private plaintiffs, not necessarily going into all these details because typically we just want to make the issue go away as quickly and as cheaply as possible. But when these issues get litigated, those are the kinds of things that the plaintiff has to prove. And it's typically very difficult for them to do so. That said, very few of these claims end up getting litigated because it's so costly to defendants to do so. But in this 2014 case against Dole, for example, this was a case in which Dole was successful at defending against a challenge by a class action litigator. And Judge Koh in this case in the Northern District of California found for Dole that a few isolated examples of actual deception are insufficient to certify the class. And the plaintiff was not able to demonstrate that they were misled by all natural claims on a product that contained ascorbic acid and citric acid. So this was a win for Dole, but it cost them a lot to get this win. And there's not many companies that want to spend the resources necessary to be victorious in court. So typically it's cheaper just to settle. So it's good to talk about all these challenges that we've been seeing on acid type ingredients. So the three biggest targets have been ascorbic acid, citric acid, and malic acid. So when these ingredients appear in products that make an all-natural claim or a preservative-free claim or no artificial preservative claim, these guys are getting demand letters very frequently. On a weekly basis, we're seeing new class action challenges. So the reason why plaintiffs are taking the position that these products aren't natural is because they're aware that synthetic sources of these ingredients are very common in the market, and that it's very rare to find citric acid that's derived from a lemon, for example. So they take the position that these ingredients are per se artificial. And a new argument that private plaintiffs have been making in the past year is that even if these ingredients are being used for a function other than, let's say, a preservative function, let's say they're being added for flavor, for an acidic flavor, if the product bears a no artificial preservatives claim, private plaintiffs are taking the position that it doesn't matter what your intended use was and what the technical function is in the product if it has a preservative effect. So even if you didn't want it to have a preservative effect, they're assuming that it does. And so we've been helping clients develop positions to support when these products are present, trying to support that they're not actually having a preservative function. So one of the ways we've been doing that is by showing that there's actually a pasteurization step, which wouldn't be necessary if this product were having a preservative effect. We're pointing to similar products that don't use acid as a flavoring but have the same shelf life. So there are arguments to be made, but if you're making a no preservatives claim on a product with one of these acids, you should be aware of the risk. So still, I'd say the most popular type of litigation against foods is challenging natural claims. And one of the reasons why that is such a popular target is because there's no formal FDA definition for natural, other than FDA having stated that it would not agree with natural claims on a product with added color, artificial flavor, or synthetic substances. So this is, not very clear guidance, and industry has been pushing FDA to issue a formal definition for natural, but we are not optimistic that that would happen anytime soon. So it's important to think about the way private plaintiffs define natural. So in the olden days, like 10, 15 years ago, being nature identical was considered being natural. So if you had a citric acid that was identical to citric acid that you would get from a lemon, that used to be enough to support a natural claim. That's no longer the case. So today, to support a natural claim, we don't only think about the source, we also think about the processing. There was a case brought against Ben & Jerry's for ice cream product that contained alkalized cocoa. So cocoa processed with alkali, Dutch processed cocoa. And it was challenged because the ice cream bore an all-natural claim. And during depositions, when the defense counsel interviewed the plaintiff, they said, so what is the injury that you suffered for having been exposed to this alkalized cocoa? And the plaintiff said, it messed with my vibe. That's like the level of sophistication of some of these plaintiffs, and they felt that that was enough to bring the case. And a lot of these plaintiffs feel that if they're not able to produce the given ingredient at home, that's evidence that it's not natural. So if you can't alkalize cocoa at home, if your grandmother couldn't make it at her stovetop, that's sort of evidence, that's all the evidence they need to challenge a natural claim. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been seeing new cases on unintentional and permitted residues being a basis for challenging natural claims. An example is, again, glyphosate in Cheerios, for example. So in past years, protein claims have been a very popular area of litigation, and this has shown a deep amount of sophistication on private plaintiffs' parts because they've been able to look at FDA's regulations and understand what they require. So under 21 CFR 101.9, which are FDA's nutrition labeling regulations, it's not required to provide a daily value for protein unless you make a protein claim. So private plaintiffs will go down grocery aisles and look for protein claims, any protein claim that they can find. So that includes both quantitative claims like 5 grams of protein per serving or high in protein. And then they will turn the box around and make sure that a percent daily value is provided for protein. If it's not present, that's a basis for sending a demand letter. Another basis for sending a demand letter is if the product in question is a product that contains only pea protein, for example. Plaintiffs are savvy enough to understand that certain plant-based proteins are not complete sources of protein. And so as a result, they understand that the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, the PD-CAS score for something with a plant-based protein is not typically going to be 100%. And so they can tell that if the percent daily value is too high in a plant-based protein food, they know that the percent daily value is incorrect, and they will send demand letters on that basis. So they've shown a decent amount of savvy in bringing these plant-based protein claims. And now we're seeing a new spate of claims for sugar. So whereas fat used to be the demonized nutrient in the American diet, today it's sugar. And so sugar claims have become much more popular. And with that, litigation about sugar claims has become a lot more popular. So FDA's regulation for sugar claims is found under 21 CFR 101.60, and it defines sugar-free, no sugar, and similar claims like low in sugar. So sugar-free and no sugar claims are permitted if a food contains less than 0.5 grams of sugar per labeled serving. The thing that the regulation requires that plaintiffs have been challenging the most, I would say, is that if the food isn't low in calories, which is defined in the regulation as well, that you have to have a footnote that says not a reduced calorie food or not a low calorie food or not for weight control. So when private plaintiffs are seeing a sugar claim that does not have this footnote and that is not a low calorie food, they've been sending demand letters. We've been defending against a lot of those lately. And a unique position that they've been taking, that private plaintiffs have been taking, is that the claim 0 grams sugar is covered under 101.60. We would not agree that a quantitative claim about sugar does fall under 101.60, but they're taking this position and we're settling these types of claims. So this is something to look out for. Trans fat. Litigation about trans fat has waxed and waned over the years, and the court precedent for this kind of lawsuit changed recently in 2018. So from 2012 to 2018, we had been referring to a case called Correa versus Dryers. And in that case, ice cream was found to have less than 0.5 grams of trans fat per serving. And under FDA's rounding rules in their nutrition labeling regulation, you can round that less than 0.5 grams of trans fat down to 0 grams trans fat. And so Dryers made a 0 grams trans fat claim on the principal display panel. And the court found that that was not a misleading claim because it complied with FDA's nutrition labeling regulations. But that case was superseded in 2018 by Hawkins versus Kroger, in which a very similar set of facts was presented, and the court did not agree that 0 grams trans fat was permissible if the product contained any trans fat. So that was a change that's noteworthy. So if you're making trans fat claims, you should be aware of that precedent. Another area of litigation we're seeing are made in USA claims. So this is not a claim that's regulated by FDA. This is a claim that's regulated by the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. And some companies misunderstand whether made in USA claims are voluntary or not. And I can assure you that made in USA claims are voluntary for domestically produced products. So whereas imported products need to have a country of origin statement, if you're a domestic product, you do not need to have that information on your product. And if you state made in the USA, you're making an affirmative claim that needs to be substantiated. So in the Federal Trade Commission's guidance, they say that all or virtually all of the product needs to be made in the US. So that includes the constituents that went into the product, and then the actual manufacture of the product needs to happen in the US. Food products have been challenged. For example, confectionery products have been challenged when they're produced with sugar cane, for example. Private plaintiffs are aware that most of the sugar produced from sugarcane is generally produced outside of the United States, and they've successfully challenged confectionery products on that basis. Candies have been challenged for containing citric acid because these plaintiffs know that most of the citric acid in the world is produced in China. So to support this type of claim, you want to make sure that no or negligible foreign content is in the product. And if you do have some amount of foreign material in the product, you might want to qualify the claim to say made in the USA from domestic and foreign sourced ingredients, for example. The FTC looks to the total manufacturing costs and how far removed the foreign content is in evaluating the claim. And California has a similar standard to FTC. It used to be a much stricter standard than the federal standard, but in January 2016, California changed its Made in USA and Made in California claims regulations to match more closely the Federal Trade Commission's guidance. And now California allows up to 5% foreign content as the final wholesale value, or up to 10% if the foreign content can either be produced or obtained in the United States. Something that's difficult about interpreting this foreign content limit is that you're looking at 5% foreign content as the percent of the final wholesale value. And at least for me, it's difficult for me to understand, like when you're looking at a candy and it contains, a very, very low percentage of citric acid, how do you decide how much of the final wholesale value of that candy is citric acid if you're a Warhead candy, for example, that's super sour? Does that mean that more of the final wholesale value is based on that foreign sourced citric acid? It's sort of a strange metric. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're evaluating Made in the USA claims. So the last type of claim we're going to talk about is a recent spate of cases that we've seen on vanilla ice cream that we think has the potential to bleed over into other types of food products. So in these cases, there's been 27 cases filed by attorneys in New York State against most of the major vanilla ice cream manufacturers in the United States. And what they're targeting are vanilla ice creams where they're they're marketed as vanilla ice cream, but when you look at the ingredient statement, it says like cream, milk, sugar, natural flavors. And so the ingredient statement does not state vanilla extract. It only says natural flavor. And these plaintiffs have clued into the fact that the natural flavor is most likely vanillin. Most likely it's vanillin that is not produced from vanilla bean, because they know if the manufacturer were using vanilla extract, they would want to call out that high value ingredient in the ingredient statement. So what the plaintiffs understand is that under FDA's flavor labeling regulation at 101.22, even though that vanilla ice cream is flavored with a natural flavor, vanillin, the product would need to be described as artificially flavored vanilla ice cream under FDA's regulations. So under 101.22, if you call out an ingredient like vanilla, but the product contains no vanilla and no flavor from vanilla, the product is artificially flavored, even if you've used all natural flavors in the product. So it's not necessarily the most intuitive thing to understand. And it shows a sophistication on the part of these private plaintiffs. And we think that this has the possibility to bleed over into other types of foods. We are helping to defend against a few similar products that are not vanilla ice cream, where there's a similar basis for challenging the flavor labeling on the principal display panel. So I wanted to mention that there was a case brought against LaCroix sodas for natural claims on their products. The plaintiff took a very unusual position in that case that we don't necessarily think is going to be taken again. But the plaintiff was challenging the designation natural flavor products that contained, for example, limonene, which is a flavor that does meet FDA's natural flavor definition. That plaintiff seems like they didn't understand that there's a separate definition for natural flavor under section 101.22. So natural flavors that meet the definition under section 101.22, of course, can continue to be described as natural flavors, even though private plaintiffs might not agree, because there is this formal definition that we can refer to as being the reasonable basis for describing the ingredient as natural flavor. That said, it's important to keep in mind that using a natural flavor and describing a product as a natural flavor in the ingredient statement is a separate issue from making a natural claim outside of the ingredient statement. So on the PDP, marketing a product with natural flavors as being all natural, that might not necessarily be supported, and it may pose a risk. So we might see more litigation in that area. And this just seems like a potentially big field for private plaintiffs to explore, because there are lots of products on the market that call out ingredients like, let's say, mango or honey mustard or sour cream and onion or cheddar cheese without saying flavored or without saying artificially flavored or artificially and naturally flavored. So we're seeing an uptick in these cases, and I think that they have the potential to really hit a bunch of different types of foods. So we're going to keep an eye on that. So the next area that I wanted to talk about is a field of food litigation that doesn't have to do with claims, but has to do with slack fill. So what is slack fill? So slack fill is the difference between the actual capacity of a container and the volume of product therein. So slack fill is permitted in certain cases, but non-functional slack fill is not permitted. So when you have too much empty space in a package, that's when you're at risk of a non-functional slack fill claim. So we've all had that experience of opening a potato chip bag or a package of a cosmetic or a movie theater candy box and being disappointed with how much candy is in that box. And so that is the sting of slack fill. And there are certain contexts in which slack fill is permitted. So if it performs an appropriate function, like you need that amount of space to properly fill the bag, that's okay. It's okay, for example, for potato chips to settle over time and result in the finished product that you're purchasing, having all of the potato chips at the bottom. When that bag was first filled, there wasn't that much space, and that space has occurred over time due to normal product settling. That is okay. It's also okay to have reusable containers with more slack fill, or other manufacturing justifications for the amount of free space in the product. The state of California has tried to expand on some of the permitted slack fill exemptions, which we're going to run through here. So this is a fairly new amendment to California's law that passed in September of 2018. And it provides for more ways to not be challenged for a slack fill violation. So California now allows you to defend against slack fill challenges if the dimensions of the product are visible to the consumer through the exterior packaging. So for example, if you're selling a container of Peeps and you've got windows showing the size of each of the individual Peeps, that's a defense. Or if the external package shows the actual size of the Peeps versus a blown up picture, and you say actual size on the PDP, that's a defense. Fill lines showing the level at which the product is filled, that's a potential way to comply. So California has responded to some of the slack fill cases in recent years and come up with these possible solutions for companies to support their slack fill positions. Unlike the claims that we were talking about earlier in the presentation, slack fill cases are often brought by county district attorneys. And they cite to unfair competition laws and unfair business practice laws in California's regulations. And unlike private litigators, they're not paying for legal counsel, they are legal counsel. And these DAs are able to make money by enforcing slack fill violations in California. And so we've seen a lot of enforcement brought by counties like Yolo County, LA County, and sometimes these DAs will join together and go after a product and extract a pretty big settlement. The potential settlement amount is that each sale is a violation that could be penalized up to $2,500. So there's a lot of money at stake here. And I've got some settlement numbers for you. Excuse me, it's in the next slide here. So these are examples of recent settlements. So ranging from 2009 to 2015 on this slide, you'll see the second one was a settlement with Johnson & Johnson between 4 different California counties for Neutrogena soap bars that exceeded $500,000. You can go back for several years of sales, and the potential penalties here are pretty big. Procter & Gamble settled for $850,000 in June 2015. The most recent settlement was with Ghirardelli for $750,000 for gift boxes, where it wasn't possible to see into the gift box to see how much fill there was. So this is a pretty active area where you don't only need to think about private litigators, you need to think about the counties coming after you as well. An example that we recently dealt with is we had a client that was making a conventional product line and then an organic product line. And they wanted to have the same price point for both the conventional and the organic product line. And so they used the same sized container for both product lines, but filled the organic product line less. So by doing that, by having less product in the organic line in the same sized container, they were able to charge the same price point for conventional and organic. And they were targeted for a slack fill settlement and did have to pay a pretty hefty fee. So that's an example of a no-no that you want to avoid. Another very prominent slack fill case that was decided recently was against McCormick Spices. So what McCormick did was take their same 4-ounce tin of pepper, but at some point they quietly changed the net weight statement from 4 ounces to 3 ounces, but they neither changed the size of the container or lowered the price. So consumers were purchasing the same container just with less pepper in it. And this was targeted for slack fill by a number of different jurisdictions. This case did not occur in California. It settled in DC, and the settlement was $2.5 million. So this is, these are big cases. And McCormick is a huge player, but we're seeing a lot of activity for even smaller companies. So it's something that is heating up and that you should keep an eye on. So I didn't want to spend too much time talking, and we wanted to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to open it up to the group.
Hi, Elise and Natalie, my fault. We're back, and I've seen a few questions come in. First, let me say thank you. I learned several new things here today. One, that you know what warhead candies are.
Oh, okay.
One of the other things I gained is really you need somebody on your staff that has read and understands 21 CFR 101, where all the labeling rules are. The other is there's a lot of new stuff about slack fill that I didn't know about, and that was good that you put some time into that. One of the questions that has come in goes to your sugar discussion, and the question is really, what about using maple syrup? Can you still claim no sugar added?
Well, that's a good question. So in 2016, when FDA changed its nutrition labeling rules, it created a new nutrient that's called added sugar. And added sugar is defined to include things like maple sugar, maple syrup, honey. It even includes sugar in excess of what you would find in 100% juice. So if you've got concentrated grape juice that you haven't reconstituted to 100%, you've only reconstituted it to 50%, that juice concentrate would contribute some added sugar. So that is something I would be careful about because that maple syrup would be considered added sugar. If you're making 100% maple syrup, there's some nuances here that we could talk about, but other than pure maple syrup and pure honey, if you're using those things as ingredients in your food, those would be considered added sugar.
Great. Thanks, Natalie. Another question that just came in. How do I know if my container or package fulfills the slack rule?
Yeah, so that's something, it's going to depend on, you have to look at it on a case by case basis, depending on what the food is and what the container is and how it's filled and what the, whether there's the potential to improve on the slack fill or whether it's completely functional. Those are the kinds of things that you need to look into. So I guess to put it most simply, you need to figure out, you need to support that the slack fill in your product is functional. So for it to be functional, it needs to be there for a reason, like an unavoidable reason, and not there because you're trying to put less product into the package and essentially deceive the consumer. That's sort of the bottom line. So the question is the slack fill functional? And there's so many different factors that go into figuring that out. It's hard to answer in the abstract, but these slides include some information on what is functional slack fill.
Thanks again, Natalie. And to the question askers, you can always contact Natalie. You see her email there on the screen right now. Natalie, one other question that came in, it came in pretty early on. Actually, I think it was your second or third slide. It was talking about puffery on the label. And the question goes to, how do you separate puffery from claims? For example, there were a couple examples that this person gave, the only the best ingredients, or promotes good gut health, or made with premium ingredients are examples that they used. How do you separate puffery from a legal claim?
Yeah, I think, a good rule of thumb is if the claim is completely subjective or can be characterized as completely subjective, that's going to lean toward puffery. So claims about taste, and how delicious something is, how much you're going to love it, that it's the best. Those are really subjective claims that are going to be more like puffery. Made with premium ingredients, that can get trickier. I mean, that suggests that's going more toward quality, and a plaintiff might be able to argue that the quality of some of your ingredients were not premium, didn't rise to the level of being premium. Bruce, do you mind reading off a couple more of those examples that you gave me a minute ago?
Sure. It was, promotes good gut health.
Okay, so yeah, and promotes good gut health. So that is a different claim. That's a different type of claim. That's not puffery. That's considered a structure function claim. And so one of the first slides was giving you a warning on not making drug claims. So the permissible claims that you can make about food and normal structures and functions of the body are called structure function claims. So helps promote a healthy gut flora, helps maintain healthy digestion. Those are structure function claims that can be supported with substantiation in the public literature. So citing to published reports about a prebiotic or probiotic ingredient. That's not puffery. That's a claim that needs substantiation. So subjective claims, puffery; not subjective claims, they all need substantiation.
Great. Thank you. I hope that worked for our listener. There's a question about GMO, and maybe that can be something to add to the next one, because I know there's a new BE labeling. But the question is, if I have a non-GMO letter from my supplier for all the ingredients in the recipe, can I label the product non-GMO?
That's another great question. So, these are all great questions. So So advice we've been giving our clients recently, because there's so many different certifications that you can get these days. So a very popular one is non-GMO certified. And there are other similar certifications to that that don't necessarily support a claim being made outside of that certification mark. So here's an example. So when you make a non-GMO claim on the principal display panel, the PDP, like no GMOs, that could be interpreted as implying that the product does not contain any GMO material. The problem is that the unintentional presence of GMOs could be an issue. And again, like, I don't think that's a very reasonable position to take, but it's a position that private plaintiffs can take. And when the non-GMO project evaluates a food, they're looking at those types of supplier statements, right? They're looking to see that you sourced all of your soybeans from an organic source, for example. The non-GMO project is not testing any ingredients. They're not testing your finished product for GM genetic material. So if a private plaintiff were to test a product that said no GMOs, and they were to detect GM material in the product, they could challenge that no GMO claim as being misleading. So that's the risk of making a claim outside of the context of a third-party certification like that. Another example is gluten-free. So you can have a gluten-free certification from a third party on your product, where again, they're just looking at the sources of your ingredients. But when you make a gluten-free claim or a no gluten ingredient claim, that's a separate claim that you might not be able to substantiate because there could be unintentional contamination there, basically.
Thanks again, Natalie. I know we're coming up on time, and I think I want to hit one more topic. There's a discussion going on in the chat room here about vanilla ice cream. I don't know if you can see the chats that are going on. If you're using natural vanilla flavor, you can call it vanilla flavored ice cream or vanilla ice cream naturally flavored. And there's a response there. And then another question. So the question is really wrapped around, and maybe you're going to have to discuss this vanilla flavor issue again.
Okay, let's see. Natural vanilla flavor. Can it be called vanilla flavored ice cream? So if that natural vanilla flavor is from vanilla, then I'm just going to share my screen again one more time. Sorry. So if that natural vanilla flavor is from vanilla bean, then that would be support for calling it vanilla ice cream, vanilla flavored ice cream, and not having to call it artificially flavored. The problem is that most natural vanilla flavor is not from vanilla. And the reason why we know that is because if it were a flavor extracted from vanilla, it would meet the definition of vanilla extract that's in the regulations. And you would use that better ingredient name, essentially. But to evaluate that that product and whether you need to call it artificially flavored vanilla is you would need to go back to your flavor supplier and ask them to confirm whether that natural vanilla flavor is from vanilla beans and is not vanillin, which is a natural flavor that is not produced from vanilla beans.
Vanilla beans. Okay, thank you, Natalie. In closing, Thank you again, Natalie. Really appreciate the insights. I know your email is on the screen, your number there for people if they'd like to contact you. Certainly that's a possibility. We'll be on the line again next Friday, same time. And our topic is Prop 65 and litigation around Prop 65. One last note is that we do hope to post this on the NCIFT website so that you can point your friends to it, or you can review it again and listen to it one more time, get some more ideas and thoughts, and share it with your coworkers.
And one thing I forgot to mention, Bruce, sorry about that, is
Sure.
that we compile what we call a compendium of food law cases, and we put them in a spreadsheet, and we try to track what's been going on and the trends and what states are fielding these types of lawsuits. So if anybody wants a copy of that compendium, just email me and I can send you a copy.
Great, that's good news. With that, thank you to all who called in. We look forward to seeing you next Friday. Stay well.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.